The answer would be the same, and the answer is both. These are exciting and distressing times. So it's exciting because one, is trying to understand what's going on, gives us an opportunity to test, so to speak, our theories and models in the real world.
Das ist der HSG Student Podcast. Mein Name ist Olli und zusammen gehen wir auf die Suche nach spannenden Geschichten und Persönlichkeiten von der HSG. Hello everyone, welcome back to the HSG Student Podcast, now called Campus Conversations. Thank you for tuning in. I have the pleasure today to welcome Professor James Davis in the studio to continue our professor series where we put our esteemed faculty in the spotlight. To give you a brief overview before we welcome together Professor Davis. Professor Davis is the Chair of International Relations at the Institute for Political Science and the Dean of the School of Economics and Political Science currently. He is studying, from what I read, publishing and consulting in the areas that are concerned with theories of international politics, global security policy, foreign policy analysis, and the role of political force in general. We will be diving into that later. For instance, the chair and Professor Davis has provided consulting services also in practice to a variety of public institutions, including the Swiss Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Defense, the Ministries of Defense of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, the Federal Chancellery of the Federal Republic of Germany, the German Bundestag, and the State Parliament of Bavaria. Probably this is not an exhaustive list. And to give an academic background, Professor Davis has enjoyed education at the Michigan State University, received doctoral honors at the Columbia University in political science and government. Afterwards, he joined Harvard and the University of Munich before he joined the University of St. Gallen almost 19 years ago as a professor of political science. With that being said, welcome, Professor Davis.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Olivier. Let me just say one thing. I'm no longer dean of the School of Economics and Political Science. I was for a number of years, but gladly have been able to pass that on to other colleagues. And so now I'm just director of the Institute of Political Science, which is enough. Gives me more time to work on my own projects.
I'm so sorry for looking that up incorrectly. Was it a burden for you because you said gladly giving it up?
It wasn't a burden, but when you're dean of a faculty at a university, you spend a lot of time working on developing your school, developing a strategy for the future of your school, trying to hire the right people for your school, managing the budget for your school, trying to manage the issues that arise in any institution, from personnel issues to questions of who's going to sit on which committee, and so there's a lot of management and coordination involved, and of course that takes you away from your own work. And as an academic, you're really interested in your own subjects. So I was happy to put in my time and to serve the faculty, but I was also happy to pass that on to a next generation of leaders so that I could get back to the stuff that really interests me, and that's my own research and teaching.
We will dive into that in a second. I wanted to start off this podcast by referring to one of the interviews you gave to Prisma, the student magazine here at the university a couple of years ago. And I learned in that interview or in that text about you that you like or seem to like traditions. And as it's almost 20 years now that you've been in St. Gallen, what kind of traditions, be it in academics or be it in your life here in St. Gallen, what kind of traditions did you build up over these last 20 years?
Oh, what kinds of traditions? Well, there are a number of traditions at the HSG that I've learned to appreciate and am happy that they continue. I mean, one of the most important, I think, is the student initiative that leads to the St. Gallen Symposium every year. And, a tradition that goes back to 1968 when students around the world were questioning authority, questioning the value of institutions. And the students at the HSG took a somewhat different tack. Rather than try to tear down existing institutions, they decided to build something up, and that is still with us. It's a symposium that brings the world to St. Gallen and shows the world what St. Gallen has to offer, and brings generations together to talk about pressing issues of the day. And I've really come to appreciate that. But the traditions here go beyond that. We have a tradition every spring, at the beginning of every spring semester, that's called the Schneeglöckli dinner, when faculty members, usually with their partners, come together for a dinner together, and gives us an opportunity to see each other outside of the regular routine. Unfortunately, this year, the Schneeglöckli tradition was not traditional in that we didn't have partners of the faculty members. Oh. The excuse was that we didn't have the space, because it usually takes place in the Weiterbildungszentrum. My answer would have been, let's find a bigger space, because I think you mess with traditions and easily can ruin them, right? It takes a long time to build them up, and once you have a tradition that actually has some value, you shouldn't mess around with it too much. So I was a bit disappointed that whoever was responsible for that decision made that decision the way they did, and hope that we go back to the tradition. Of course, the Schneeglöckli dinner probably needs to evolve and keep with the times. Maybe the old format wasn't exactly the right one, but I think there is something to be said for bringing faculty members with their significant others together once a year so they can all enjoy each other.
And are there some legendary anecdotes that spontaneously come up to your mind that came from these Schneeglöckli dinner? They sound very, it sounds like when everyone comes together, let's say in a more private setting, and the whole faculty, it somehow sounds like a very lively, and that there's many things that can happen at these kind of evenings. So
there are, but I think some of the more interesting ones we'd have to talk about when the tape isn't rolling.
Okay, we leave it at that. Let's turn to some more let's say serious topics. With current political developments, I'm pretty sure you're very much up to date. Many elections taking place, right? Conflicts in Ukraine, Israel, beyond, and your background as a political scientist. Is it an exciting times or a distressing times for you now as a professor? And maybe the answer would be different if I ask you as a private person.
The answer would be the same, and the answer is both. These are exciting and distressing times. So it's exciting because one, is trying to understand what's going on, gives us an opportunity to test, so to speak, our theories and models in the real world, to take the thought experiments that we often conduct in the seminar room and expose them to what's going on in real time. Think about models of crisis decision making or strategic interaction or the like. Watching those play out in real time is exciting in a sort of academic or intellectual way. But of course, it's very distressing when what we're talking about is a war of aggression in Ukraine, where people are threatening to use nuclear weapons, or we're talking about a brutal attack on civilians in Israel, where just indescribable brutality took place, leading to a military intervention in Gaza, which is creating incredible human suffering, with lots of innocent lives being lost or ruined, and so that's of course very distressing, both as an academic, but of course as just a human being, right? So the answer is it's both exciting, it's intellectually challenging, but also very, very distressing.
And did it change somehow, let's say in a more general way, the way how you work in the classroom, how you work as a professor, how you consult the political institutions that you work together with?
Well, it makes these kinds of real world events make it. Well, first of all, I would say they bring a lot of abstract ideas that we discuss in the classroom alive, and they make them seem more relevant, because you can point to something that's happening now that students can relate to in a way that they might not be able to when you're talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis or the Berlin crisis, or the fall of the Berlin Wall, which for me seems like yesterday. But when I look at the dates of births of my students, I realize that some of them are born, right around the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall, or even afterward. And so that's probably for them ancient history. So being able to discuss events as they unfold, I think helps to make the relevance of some of the theories and models we talk about clearer and less sort of abstract and far away.
And I'm curious, how do you yourself inform about the current conflicts that are going on? I could imagine that probably someone like you with your background watches these contemporary developments differently than someone that is probably less focused on all these theories and with this, let's say, inherent or intrinsic interest into these global developments. What kind of strategies do you follow? Do you talk to people, read the news, as expert newsletters?
Yeah, so all of the above. And of course, I think the difference between the way I look at these events unfolding and perhaps the way my mother, who's an informed person, does, is I'm always looking at them through the lens of particular academic debates and abstract models, trying to think about what these crises tell us about human life in general, and then trying to think about what our general arguments tell us about how to solve these crises in particular. So I'm constantly moving back and forth between my world of models and theories and the world of observation as it is developing in front of me. But to take the example of the Middle East conflict, our students in the International Affairs program went to the program directors and said, we don't have any courses on the Middle East, and we should. And the students were right, we should. Of course, one of the issues we deal with is that we don't have enough positions to have experts on every region of the world. We should, and I wish we did. And if our program keeps growing, you can bet that we'll be making that case, but it's difficult right now because the university is in a period of budget constraints. But the students had it exactly right. We have an ongoing, unfolding crisis in Gaza, and there's no course on that. So the program came to me and asked if I would be willing to develop a course in relative short order on that topic. And I thought, well, yeah, I know something about the Middle East. I've spent some time in the region, and in an earlier period, I spent more time reading about the region more systematically. So I used the break between Christmas and the beginning of this semester to actually go to the region, and I visited the Gulf countries, which was the part of the Middle East that I really hadn't visited before, and thought it was important because it seems to me that much of the traditional centers of Arab and Islamic thought and influence, and I'm thinking here about places like Baghdad, Damascus, and Cairo. They've lost, to a certain extent, their importance in the developments of the region, and a lot of that influence has moved to the Gulf states. And since I didn't know the Gulf states, I thought, well, if I'm going to teach this course, I maybe should get to know that a little bit better. So I took a trip down there and I visited some of the think tanks and talked to people in the foreign ministries of these countries in an effort to try to see the Middle East through their eyes. And I hope that is helping as I teach this course this semester, a bachelor's course on the contemporary Middle East, and hope that the students are able to gain something from the fact that I just came back from the area.
And this trip, you planned it because the students requested that we need this kind of course?
Yeah, I wasn't planning to
Wow.
go. I just I thought, well, if I'm going to teach this course, I need to be a little bit more authentic. I've lived in Jerusalem. I was a guest professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. I've been to the West Bank and met, I think, 3 times with the Palestinian Authority, the institutionalized part of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. I've been to Jordan. I've talked to people in the government there. I've been to refugee camps from the Syrian civil war, but I didn't know the Gulf. So I thought, well, now's the time to go see what the Gulf is all about. So yeah, it was a trip that I owe to the students.
Hats off to this dedication. This probably is not something, let's say, common that professors would do like that.
Oh, I don't know. I have a lot of colleagues who are very committed to their teaching, and go all out for their students, and I'm happy for that.
That's very. I'm impressed, honestly. I would love to take the course. Unfortunately, already in my master's. Hats off. I think that is wonderful. That you did that. And obviously I'm now wondering, in a nutshell, of course, you can teach a whole course about it and probably even more because it's so rich, the region, right? But how did it change your perspective on the conflict, the concrete conflict in Gaza and the whole region? How did that trip change some of the perspectives or let you better understand what's going on?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was underscored, I knew this somehow, but it was in a sense became much more alive. Is just the very complicated dynamics amongst the Arab states. We tend to think there's an Arab-Israeli conflict, and it's sort of all the Arabs on one side and Israel on the other, and forget that there's a very fluid, dynamic, sometimes rivalrous politics amongst the Arab states, that the way in which Islam and politics relate to one another varies across the region, and so we have to be very careful when we talk about political Islam, because that's not just a homogenous phenomenon. the way in which the states of the region relate to Iran, a Persian civilization, is different. It's not, or varies. It's not uniform. So I guess a better understanding of the complexities of the Arab world and how that then relates to, those complexities relate to the Gaza crisis was what I brought back.
And something you didn't not only take this trip to the Gulf states between Christmas and New Year, you also attended the Munich Security Conference in February, right? Probably you did it multiple times before, but I saw it on your LinkedIn feed, and I'm very curious. I also asked Simon Evenet, who was at the WEF in Davos WEF. What did you take away from the Munich Security Conference this year? I mean, of course, it's already a month roughly ago, but what were the insights? Because it's such a, I feel like it's been like such an intensive time that we have. And then Simon Evenet told me it was kind of the calm before the storm. And was it that kind of feeling as well in Munich this year, or was it different?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a general sense of unease, and you take that away. And the real sense that we're in a period of transition and no one knows what's coming next. I think people sense or have concluded based on some analysis that the, whatever you want to call it, post-Cold War era is over, that the optimism we had about the prospect for something like, a consensus on the rules of the game for the world after the Cold War, that optimism was misplaced, that for a variety of reasons, people have different priorities, different perspectives, and that it's going to be a bumpy road for a while until we reach some kind of a new consensus or a new equilibrium. I think, on the one hand, there is the sense that the West has perhaps rediscovered itself, but that sense of rediscovery is coupled with a big question mark, and that's the question mark of what would happen if Donald Trump were to be reelected in the United States. And one of the main topics in every discussion in Munich was, my God, what are we going to do if Donald Trump gets reelected? The war in Ukraine was one of the major topics, both officially and unofficially. Officially, lots of consensus that we in the West have to do everything we can to support Ukraine. And then as soon as you got behind the curtain, so to speak, or in a back room, everybody wondering, is this really realistic? What are we going to do if they fall? So a sort of a lack of confidence, and maybe that's the way to put it for the West, is in a certain sense, I wouldn't say lack of confidence, but questioning whether we should be confident. I mean, it's not quite lack yet, but it's a certain sense of insecurity about how cohesive and committed we are to what we say. There was also a quite focused discussion amongst members of, for want of a better term, the global South and the developed countries. The global South upset that their topics, their interests are systematically ignored. I think, and lots of sort of claims of hypocrisy that the West is hypocritical. They get really excited when there's a war in Ukraine, but nobody's paying attention to all the wars going on in Africa.
Yeah.
But one could also sort of ask, well, on the one hand, you're upset that the West is not doing enough to engage with African crises. On the other hand, you keep saying African solutions for African problems. My sort of takeaway was that the global South was more than willing to accuse the global North of hypocrisy, but the global North had plenty of grounds to accuse the global South of hypocrisy, but they didn't do it. So that was an interesting takeaway. But I think that, the biggest takeaway, and it resonates with what Simon even had told you about Davos, is, are we sort of in the storm or before the storm? Is worse to come? I think that's sort of where most of us were.
And probably if we ask this question before, or are we within the storm, especially if we're before, I feel like NATO is one of these big, not elephants, but kind of everyone talks about NATO, right? And this act number 5. Sorry. What is your sense? Does this have high reliability? Do you trust in that let's say mechanism as of now?
As of now, I would say yes. Article 5 is the cornerstone of NATO, and without it, NATO has much less importance as a military alliance. I should say, first and foremost, NATO is a political alliance. So that's oftentimes forgotten. NATO is first and foremost a political alliance amongst democratic states in the North Atlantic area who have committed to coordinate their security policies with each other. But it's a political alliance with a strong military component. And at the heart of that is the commitment to defend one another if one of us is attacked. And I still think that commitment is solid. By the way, the Article 5 was invoked once, and that was after the attacks on New York and Washington, D.C. In September 11th attacks. The European NATO members and Canada offered assistance to the United States. Why do I say that? Because shortly before the Munich Security Conference, Donald Trump, a Republican candidate for president, called into question his commitment to that Article 5 provision and said, by the way, do you think the Europeans would come to our aid if we were ever attacked? Well, they've already showed that they would. And so I don't doubt the United States' commitment to Article 5, but I do doubt Donald Trump's commitment. And that's one more reason why it would be very dangerous for the world and dangerous for NATO if he were to be reelected.
And I think doubling down on that, I read an interview with you in Blick from February 2022, where you said, where it was reported that you said that the security architecture of the West is apparently not working. And that was 2022, right? Now we're 2024. Do you already see somehow solutions, how to deal with autocratic regimes? We're not willing to play along these rules that we thought would work globally, and especially, or is everything depending on the elections in the US in in November this year?
No, I don't think everything depends on those elections, but I think a lot does, because the United States, for all of its faults, is still the power that has, when necessary, sort of pulled people together, butted heads together, and said, "Folks, we have to find a solution to this problem." One of the things we know from social science is that collective goods, although everybody would benefit from them, tend to be underprovided for unless you have some kind of an actor that is able to bring the others together, that's willing to incur the costs to do so. Of course, that actor reaps benefits from the provision of the collective good, but you need some kind of a hegemonic state that's willing to bear the costs of organizing the group, offer certain select incentives for people to cooperate in the provision of some collective good. And here, the collective good is security. And I think we've had a long run of great power peace, largely because the United States has been able to create certain institutions that have helped manage the problems we have in a world where there is no world government. And so I think it helps to have the United States there. But is all lost if the United States goes its own way for a while? No, but it depends. It will depend on what others do. And obviously, in an era when we have autocratic states that, for whatever reason, are not inclined to play by the rules that we have established over the course of the last half century, one has to think about how to deal with that. Some of those actors don't matter that much, right? It's sad for those that suffer under autocratic rule in small countries in the developed world, but when big countries, in particular rising countries, challenge those rules and others aren't willing to fight for them, and to stand up for them, then we're entering a period where everything's up for grabs, and that's not a world that is likely to be stable.
So probably I could imagine from these rising countries that you're referring to, one is probably China. Not sure whether you would consider Iran as a rising country, but from what I read, at least here, everyone is like kind of, let's say, considering that Iran has his hands in these conflicts, at least in the Middle East. How, because it seems to be so difficult, right? You have Trump on the one hand, which is it's so dependent whether, or the US, and it's so dependent whether he really gets elected. And then what will happen? If not, what else will happen? Then you have China, you have Iran, all these kind of influences. And it seems like so difficult to handle. And because no one knows what to do. And it's all depending on what's going to happen in the future. Do you have like any personal, let's say, solution to offer how to deal with it, how to react or act with it, with these kind of, let's say, there's, I think, this term super wicked problems, and it seems to be, for me, they're like a super wicked problem that is kind of difficult to solve.
Yeah, I mean, so the problems are different, and probably we need different solutions for different problems. If I'm looking at China, what I see is a country that's has been growing in economic and political influence around the world. A country that is probably still trying to find its role, has ambitions. It certainly wants to be among the leading powers of the world. but may in fact have misunderstood what the causes or the preconditions for its growth and economic and political influence have been, and maybe playing with or risking weakening those preconditions. So what I'm talking about here is, right, China was able to develop when China liberalized its economy and under Deng Xiaoping, allowed private property, allowed some market competition, allowed foreign investment, obviously under conditions that were not really, free market, open economy, but still allowed foreign investment, allowed large numbers of young Chinese to leave the country to study and go abroad. And in a period of liberalization, China took off. Xi Jinping, for whatever reason, seems to feel that he needs to clamp down on that liberalizing model and reassert the authority of the Chinese Communist Party over aspects of Chinese life where it had withdrawn or become weaker. If you talk to people that have investments in China, they'll tell you how the party is trying to influence corporate decisions and monitor a lot of the activities of these companies. And that is having the predictable effect of slowing down Chinese growth. The restriction of Chinese social life, public life, is having the predictable effect of leading to all kinds of protests, whether it's protesting the COVID policies, travel restrictions, or the like. And so, thinking through what that means, how to deal with that kind of a China that is growing, not as fast as it was, has the potential to play a major role, but maybe doing things at home that are weakening its position. Trying to think through how to deal with that type of an actor is a challenge and one we should be doing. But it's a different challenge than thinking through how to deal with Iran. What is Iran? Iran is a revolutionary regime where the revolution may be losing steam. The revolution took place in 1979. What we know from studies of revolutionary regimes is that with generational change, when the revolutionary regime, or the revolutionary generation dies or passes from the scene, and younger generations that are less committed to the ideology of the revolution come to power, that one might see some changes. So a different kind of a political dynamic at home, at the same time still suffering from the imposition of sanctions over decades, the sort of boxing in of Iran in the region, a kind of containment, which has led then to foment all kinds of instability through non-state actors, armed non-state actors in the region. I think that's the reaction of a country that's has a weak hand, not a strong hand. So I think there you're trying to deal with a weak country that's trying to sort of break free of the shackles of that have been imposed on it, and deal with the emergence of a younger generation that's no longer committed to the ideals of the Islamic Revolution. So it's a little bit of a different situation than the situation in China. And you're right; these are complex problems, wicked problems, if you want to use that term, and trying to manage them all at the same time as you have your own domestic political problems is a challenge. Just take the United States. It's a very polarized society right now. There are important domestic political challenges, and trying to sustain a nuanced, complex foreign policy while at the same time dealing with deep societal problems at home is a big challenge. That's a wicked problem. So these are challenging times, but fear and resignation are not options. We have to move forward somehow. Putting your head in the sand isn't going to help.
And I think maybe you have some insights, because from what I read, you also do a lot of these, let's say, public consulting kind of projects, let me call it like that. Probably you would use a different term when states or political institutions come to you and ask you, hey, we need help on whatever topic. Would something like what we just discussed before, would that be somehow some kind of the starting point for such a work, or is it way more specific and more nuanced? I'd be really interested in learning about how these kind of projects come up, and then how they develop, and on what kind of factors you would look at to give kind of an assessment of the situation, or even a recommendation on what to do.
Yeah, I think people have different approaches to these kinds of questions. I think it would be arrogant for me to assume that I have the answer to the problems that state decision makers are confronting. I have tremendous respect for decision makers. Why? Because decision makers have to make a decision. Academics just have to analyze. We don't have to actually decide at the end of the day. And boy, am I happy I don't have to do that, right? But the way I approach these jobs when I'm asked to help out is to ask a lot of questions and to try to help people find their answer, and that is, to point out the complexities, the interconnections, and oftentimes the trade-offs. For me, the essence of politics is actually found in the need to make a decision that balances value trade-offs. The reason we have politics is because all good things do not go together. So I always say to my students, let's take the values of any of the liberal revolutions. You can take the American Revolution and the Declaration of Independence that talks about the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Or you can take the French Revolution that talks about liberté, égalité, fraternité. Well, I can't have maximum liberty without impinging on some amount of égalité, because if everybody's free to do whatever they want, some will have more than others at the end of the day. But if I say, well, I value égalité above all else, well, then it's hard to maintain liberté, because at some point, maximum égalité means I have to take something away from somebody and redistribute it, which means you're impinging on my liberty. And so, let's take, we could take the American version as well. If my pursuit of the pursuit of my happiness is infringing on someone else's enjoyment of their liberty, well, then one or the other has to be constrained, right? So I think what we realize the minute we start to think about this is that we can all agree that we share a certain set of values, but we can't maximize all of them all of the time at the same time. And somehow we have to balance. How much can I take away from you in order to create some sense of égalité, some sense of equality in society? What's legitimate? How much can I tax you? How much can I tax your parents' estate when they die to make other people more equal to you? These are tough questions, and in international relations, it's similar. There are a lot of things we would like to do at the same time, but they require trade-offs. And so one of the ways I approach these kinds of jobs is to ask people questions or point out the trade-offs that they need to come to terms with and help them find their answer. As again, it's usually not the case that I think that I have the answer for them.
So it sounds to me really about also not only thinking about trade-offs, and the result is prioritization. You want to do something, but probably you have 10 things you want to do, and you need to kind of rank them, and then also watch on the interactive effects between when you rank them, what happens. Is there some, let's say, general questions that you would always ask, or there's some kind of patterns of questions that make a difference when you talk to these kind of leaders, that probably could also be interesting for someone who has to prioritize his own life or a project at work, or anything else, because we're constantly prioritizing, right, our lives. I feel like also individuals, groups, organizations, politicians, political institutions.
Well, my first question usually is, what are you trying to achieve? And oftentimes they don't know. So that's the big question, right? Is to first help them define what their objectives are. Usually, people recognize that they have a problem, but they haven't really been able to figure out what their goal is. They want the problem to go away, so that's pretty general way of putting framing the goal. But more particularly or more substantively, what's your goal, and helping them to understand if you pursue that goal, you will have to make some trade-offs, and which trade-offs are you willing to make, and to what extent. So I guess that would be my general approach, but I don't have I'm not probably as systematic as maybe some of my colleagues in the business school are, who do this stuff probably much better when they go into companies and try to help them with the same types of issues.
And I think something that you have been setting up also during the Munich Security Conference, to come back to that, is a study group on, let me look it up to not say the wrong thing, the European Nuclear Study Group, ENSG. So let me just apply what I learned from you just a couple seconds ago. What is the goal that you try to achieve with that study? Why was it now that you felt like we need that institution? What kind of difference can it make to probably other groups that arguably already have a watch on let's say the nuclear situation in the world?
So I'm trying to achieve two goals. One is to identify what the threats are to effective nuclear deterrence in Europe today. And I think there are probably a number of them. Some are political, some are technological. And once those are identified, then to think about how to mitigate those threats or risks. And the second objective is to foster a younger generation of analysts and scholars, and encourage them to think about devoting some time in their careers to thinking about nuclear questions. Because I fear that we lost a couple of generations of students in the exuberance of the immediate post-Cold War period when we thought, wow, we're now free of the dangers of the Cold War. We don't need to be burdening our students with courses on nuclear strategy and arms control, and we can devote our time now to third world development and more positive things. Well, nuclear weapons are still here. You've already pointed out that we have a number of authoritarian regimes. Many of those are also regimes with nuclear weapons, and they've shown a willingness to brandish those weapons as they try to change the status quo. And so I think it's incumbent upon those of us who spent time earlier in our careers thinking about these questions to pass on that knowledge to a younger generation and encourage them to devote some of their professional careers to dealing with these questions. So it's two objectives. What do we need to do in the real world of nuclear deterrence today? And how can I help get a new generation up and running to continue to think about these questions and help decision makers navigate the difficult waters that I think we're probably already in, but certainly lie ahead.
And what do you expect? Because I think the plan is to publish a report at the next Munich Security Conference in 2025, if I read that correctly.
Yeah, so what we've done is we've actually tried to identify some younger scholars and universities and think tanks, and we're bringing them together over the course of the next year. And the goal is to basically think about what the threats are to nuclear stability, to nuclear deterrence, and identify those, list them, the most important developments that should lead us to be worried, and then talk about what can be done to mitigate those risks. And those are, really varied. They're everything from, revisionist powers. Think about Putin, who wants to revise the post-Cold War settlement, change borders through the use of force, to domestic politics in the United States. What happens if we get a Trump who's no longer willing to extend the U.S.'s nuclear deterrent umbrella to Europe? To technological changes, which I think many of us haven't quite thought through, the implications of which we haven't thought through. Hypersonic weapons, for example. Are they stabilizing? Are they destabilizing? AI as applied to nuclear systems. Henry Kissinger, who recently died, was worried at the end of his life about what it would mean if we paired artificial intelligence with command and control of nuclear weapons. Thought that AI might make moves, so to speak, to use sort of a game analogy, that we've never thought about before, and some of these could be dangerous. So there's a lot to think about, both on the political, social, but also on the technological front.
Let me think about how to follow up on that, because it sounds very comprehensive.
Well, I think what we want to do is, you correctly noted that we'd like to have a first report ready in a year's time. I think what we want to do is just set out an agenda. We're not going to have any of this solved. That would be far too ambitious a project. Our objective is more to sort of lay out the agenda. And, my hope is that by bringing this generation of people together that are in their 30s, 40s, early 50s, networking them, encouraging them, that we will develop the intellectual capital and capacity necessary to then begin to work on that agenda. Maybe new teams, new partnerships emerge. So we've got people from the UK, we've got people from the Nordics, we've got people from France, we have people from Germany, we have people from the Netherlands. We're bringing people together from Eastern Europe, bringing people together from different places and traditions, and trying to get them to focus together on a set of questions that I think are in a real sense existential.
And let me ask you one last question on let's say these kind of applied projects before we move forward for the finals of this podcast, about some personal questions. During this next year and during your work with all the other projects, how important, in let's say in this political work is the network, the people, the insights that probably the general public cannot get versus, let's say, public information that is out there. So is it really about just properly analyzing public available information that just is a very substantial work package of work that is to do? Or is it really also about combining this with insights that, let's say, no one else can as easily get as when you have like this kind of format of a study group?
Well, some of us in the study group have, at various points in our career, had access to classified information that governments work with, but that does not form the basis of what we're working on. What we're working on are questions that are readily accessible to the public, information readily accessible. I mean, some of us that have worked on various projects for governments, or some of the members have been in government. They'll bring insights to bear that draw obviously on that information, but the nature of classified information is it's classified, so we don't talk about those things in this kind of a setting. But my hope is that by bringing people together who have slightly different backgrounds and slightly different perspectives, we have one colleague from the UK whose work is more in international law and ethics, because I think that's an important aspect of nuclear strategy, is thinking about the ethical and legal implications of what we're talking about. So people bring different skills to the table, and obviously none of those would be present in a single member of the general public, but they're also not present in a single member of this group. Each of us brings different skill sets to the table, and that's by design.
Okay, let's move for the second part, or for the shorter second part of this podcast, towards some, let's say, personal questions. And I thought about starting with a very simple one, connecting to what we just discussed. I think there is one photo on your LinkedIn feed where you sit at the European Munich conference at the transatlantic forum that you moderated, and I think next to you is Ursula von der Leyen, and I think a couple seats further is Markus Söder from Germany. Would young Professor Davis, imagined this seat at, let's say, almost the highest political level when you look back to the last years? Is that something like you wanted, or you expected, you could imagine, or not?
No, I didn't. First of all, I didn't think I was going to be having my career in Europe. I imagined I would be having an academic career in the United States, and sort of by chance, a fluke, I ended up in Munich, and then from Munich came to St. Gallen. and then found myself engaged in discussions with Europeans, and then eventually European decision makers. And I guess it's not only a recognition of my scholarship, but I guess there's some sense of trust that these people trust that I can help moderate these discussions in a way that is fair and based on the evidence, and not I'm not playing any games. And so I'm oftentimes surprised, and I look to my left and see Ursula von der Leyen, and I look to my right and see the NATO Secretary General, and I wonder, what am I doing here? Yeah.
And have you found an answer? What is about your role?
No, I haven't quite found the answer, but I hope I'm at least contributing a little bit to the discussion and setting the agenda.
And when because we also talked about priorities now in the last couple of minutes. For you personally, what kind of priorities have you set for yourself that changed over the years as well? I feel like, for instance, academia probably is quite high up, also scholaring the next generation. But what else is there for yourself? Not only professionally. I have I talked to one professor in Beijing during my exchange last semester, and he always said, first is myself, my health, then friends and family, then I think, and very low, very further down, there was, let's say, work. So I was curious, how does it look for you?
Yeah, I mean, as you get further along, you realize that work is only one part of the bigger picture, right? And I have a few other objectives. I mean, if you want to talk about me, I, as a young person, I played a lot of piano. I have a piano, and I realize I don't play it nearly as well as I used to. So I'd like to get back to that and find a teacher who can deal with the crazy schedule of a HSG professor who can never be sure whether or not I can make a weekly appointment. So getting back to my piano is one of my goals. I'd like to learn another language, and I started Spanish here. I sat in the class, a regular HSG Spanish class, and I think the students that knew me from my own teaching were kind of curious why I was sitting with the students, but I've decided I'd like to learn Spanish. So that's a goal for me. I started, I ski a lot, and I still ski, and I go to the gym here, and I do my weights, and I run, I jog, but I started tennis and was enjoying that. But then we had one day of just practicing backhand, and I did something and kind of slipped a little bit of a disc or something, and then I had weeks of back pain. So I've kind of backed off on that goal, but maybe I'll go back to that. I think looking for a sport that you can play with someone as you get older would be kind of nice. So maybe it'll be tennis. Maybe I have to find another one if the back gives me problems again. Yeah. But yeah, for me, there are hobbies and the like. The other thing I've been thinking about is, what do you do when you retire from the HSG? In Switzerland, professors have to retire at 65. When I look at you, I know you think that's a long way off, and that's very old, but it isn't. Today, people live into their 80s, into their 90s, and I can't imagine just playing tennis for 20 years. So one of my goals is to define the next chapter, find out what it is that I'm going to do. And, you get to a point in your life when you really have everything you need. So it's about finding the best way to give back, and where can you make a significant contribution, or help leave some corner of the world better off. And so that's sort of where I am right now.
And I didn't know that. Is 65, is this a hard cut?
Hard cut.
Like
hard cut.
You're
kicked out.
Wow.
You can stick around till 70, teach a course or two, but you have to clear your chair. Hard cut, 65. And, that's, it's interesting because by the time you're 65, you actually know something about your field.
Hopefully.
So figuring out what to do is one of the challenges. But life's about mastering all these challenges.
And is there any hints for young people? That you something that you like, that you would have loved to know earlier on in your career or in your life, something that you're like, if I would have known that when I was 25, as probably many of the listeners in here, that would have helped me to master some of these challenges, let's say, better or with less stress. Is there something that pops up in your mind that?
Well, I think the thing that I sense with your generation is that you worry a lot about the future, and there are good reasons to worry about the future. And for your generation, the climate catastrophe seems to be one of the driving fears. I would say when I was 25, we were worried that we were going to be incinerated in a nuclear war. That seemed very present, and drove many of us into the fields that we're in. And so, I would just say, you're not unique. There have been other generations that had to worry about some pretty big questions and set themselves to mastering those problems and solving them, and did a pretty good job. At least we're still around. And so, I would say, keep at it. Set yourself to the task and keep at it, even if people tell you you're crazy or it can't be solved, or, keep working at it. The other thing I deal with a lot in my institute is young people who have just finished a degree, whether it's their master's or their doctorate, or maybe they're working as a postdoc, and they're worried about the next phase of their career and say it's become very competitive out there. And it has. It's much more competitive than it was when I was looking for my first job. The requirements for, let's say, an assistant professorship today are so much more than they were when I first was hired as an assistant professor. And people think, I'll never get a job for whatever reason, right? The requirements are too high, or, I'm not the proper minority. There's affirmative action, or there's, we're trying to have gender equality, and I'm a white male. I'll never get a job, right? I hear a lot of this, right, from people. And there too, I would say, you're not the first generation to look at a tough job market. And in my experience, people that keep plugging along, keep working at it, end up getting a job and end up having productive careers and productive lives. And your first job is not the end of the journey. It's just the beginning. Your dissertation is not the last word on anything. It's just your first contribution to a discussion. And so putting these things a little bit in perspective is what I think I can do from where I am now. I was exactly as nervous as these people were when I was 25. Maybe, if anybody wants to listen, I can tell them, calm down. You're not the first group facing this, and you won't be the last.
And if you had one wish, let's say for the next 12 months, to finish that podcast, I feel like that's something probably that could be interesting. Is there something, it can be anything. So,
my wish for the next 12 months. Oh, that's very narrow.
You want more?
And no. My wish is that in 12 months' time we have a nice little report on what the challenges are for nuclear deterrence in Europe.
That's a great. That would be lovely. I wish you all the best with that project. From what I heard, I'm very optimistic that you can achieve that. It was wonderful to have you here for this conversation.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Olivier.
I appreciated your openness and all your answers, all your wisdom on the challenges that we're about to solve. And with that, thank you for everyone who tuned in, and take care, and see you in the next episode. Bye-bye.